The crystal spires of Zephyr Prime shimmered with emergency lights as delegates from across the galaxy gathered in the Great Council Chamber. Ambassador Kethver of the Valorian Federation stood at the speaking platform, his forearms trembling, as he addressed the assembled representatives. The peaceful blue-skinned humanoid had never imagined he would be the one to deliver such terrible news to the Galactic Council. "Honored delegates," Kethver began, his voice carrying through the translation devices worn by each species present. "The Korath Empire has broken the 1,000-year peace. 3 of our member civilizations have fallen in the past 6 rotations. The Alterans, the Kepler colony, and the entire vegan system have been consumed." A wave of shocked gasps and horrified clicking sounds rippled through the chamber. The Korath had been contained in the Outer Rim for centuries, their biomechanical ships kept in check by ancient treaties and careful diplomacy. No one had expected them to suddenly resume their aggressive expansion. Kethver activated a holographic display showing the affected sectors. Red zones spread like a plague across the star map, each one representing billions of lives lost or enslaved. Their bioships have evolved beyond our ability to counter them. Energy weapons are absorbed and used to strengthen their hulls. Kinetic bombardments are healed within hours. Our finest military minds cannot devise effective countermeasures. The Zephyrian delegate, a tall crystalline being named Quental, spoke with a voice like wind chimes. "What of our combined fleets? Surely the united forces of the Council can mount an effective defense." "We tried," Kethver replied, his tone heavy with defeat. "The 3rd Battle Fleet engaged them at Rigel Station. The Korath ships studied our tactics for exactly 17 minutes before adapting complete immunity to our weapons. Of 200 vessels, only 12 escaped to report the defeat." High Counselor Murthan of the Ancient Centauri Collective rose from his seat. The elderly humanoid had lived through the last Korath War and remembered the horror of their biomechanical monstrosities. These creatures do not simply conquer, they consume. They absorb the biological and technological essence of their victims, growing stronger with each victory. If we cannot stop them soon, they will become unstoppable. The chamber fell silent as the weight of their situation settled over the delegates. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through diplomacy, trade, and the occasional show of force. Their military doctrine focused on defense and deterrence, not aggressive warfare. They were civilized beings who had moved beyond the primitive need for constant conflict. Junior Analyst Veltara, a young Valorian working in the Council's research division, watched the proceedings from the observation gallery. As panic began to spread among the delegates, she quietly accessed her data terminal and began searching the Council's vast database of known civilizations. There had to be someone, somewhere, who could help them. Most species in the database were either already Council members or too primitive to possess spacefaring technology. The few independent civilizations with advanced capabilities were either too distant to reach in time or had their own reasons for avoiding galactic politics. Veltara was about to give up when she found an unusual entry buried deep in the files. DA3, designation, Earth. The entry was brief and mostly consisted of warnings. Class 12 Deathworld. Extreme gravity, violent weather systems. Aggressive. Native life forms. Atmospheric composition toxic to most known species. The planet's dominant species had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel and maintained a small presence in their local system. What caught Veltara's attention was a note from the survey team that had first cataloged the system. Recommend avoiding contact with Sol3 inhabitants. Species shows extreme territorial behavior and weapons technology far beyond their general technological level. Planetary environment appears to have produced organisms adapted for constant warfare. Veltara read the entry twice, then checked the accompanying files. The humans, as they called themselves, had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting. Not just each other, but their own planet. Their world regularly tried to kill them with earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, droughts, volcanic eruptions, and temperature extremes that would be lethal to most galactic species. Yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived. Their military technology was primitive by galactic standards, but showed disturbing innovation. Instead of elegant energy weapons, they used crude chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. Their ships were heavily armored metal constructs rather than the graceful energy-fueled vessels preferred by civilized species. Most telling, their doctrines seemed to assume that any enemy would adapt to their tactics. So they built their entire military philosophy around constant change and unpredictability. Down in the council chamber, the debate had devolved into chaos. Some delegates called for immediate evacuation of the threatened sectors. Others demanded a desperate last stand with all available forces. A few suggested attempting to negotiate with the Korath. Though everyone knew such efforts had failed in the past, Veltara made her decision. She compiled her findings into a brief report and transmitted it directly to High Counselor Merthen's personal terminal. The message was simple: possible military assistance available from Sol3, Earth. Species evolved on Class 12 Deathworld. Military doctrine based on adaptive warfare. Recommend immediate contact. Merthen read the message during a brief recess in the proceedings. His first instinct was to dismiss it. How could primitives from a dangerous world possibly help against the most advanced military threat the galaxy had ever known? But as he read the survey reports, a strange idea began to form. Perhaps that was exactly what they needed. Every Korath. Victory had come against civilized species who fought in predictable ways. Their bioships adapted by studying patterns and developing counters. But what if they faced an enemy that had no patterns, no predictable doctrine, no civilized approach to warfare? When the session resumed, Merthen stood to address the assembly. I propose we exhaust all possible options before accepting defeat. There is one species we have not yet contacted for assistance. He shared Veltara's findings with the chamber. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly negative. Delegate after delegate rose to object. These humans were barely spacefaring. Their technology was primitive. Their planet was a nightmare world that no civilized being could survive. How could such creatures possibly help advanced civilizations like themselves? But as the arguments continued, a simple fact remained: they were out of options. The Korath would not stop, could not be reasoned with, and had proven immune to conventional warfare. If they were going to try something desperate, now was the time. The vote was close. But in the end, desperation won over pride. The Galactic Council authorized an official request for military assistance to be transmitted to Earth's governing bodies. The message would be sent using standard diplomatic protocols, offering trade agreements and technological exchange in return for help against a mutual threat. None of them could have imagined what they had just set in motion. Earth's response would arrive in less than 30 days, and with it would come something the galaxy had never seen before. The peaceful civilizations of the Council were about to meet a species that had learned warfare from a world that never stopped trying to kill them. As the session ended and delegates filed out of the chamber, Veltara remained in the observation gallery, staring at the star map that showed the spreading red zones of Korath conquest. She wondered if she had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history or possibly its salvation. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Base, staring at the massive display screen that showed the incoming transmission from deep space. The message had arrived 3 hours ago, and his translation team was still working to decode its meaning. The universal translator kept stumbling over concepts that seemed to have no human equivalent. "Sir, we've got the basic message figured out," reported Lieutenant Commander Susan Davis, the base's chief communications officer. "It's a formal request for military assistance from something called the Galactic Council. They're asking for help against what they call cosmic predators that are consuming entire star systems." Morrison rubbed his chin thoughtfully. At 55, he had spent his entire career preparing humanity for the possibility of hostile alien contact. Earth's small but growing space fleet had been designed with one primary mission: protect the home world from unknown threats. Now it seemed those threats were already out there, and other species were asking for Earth's help. "What else do we know about these aliens?" Morrison asked. Davis pulled up additional data on her screen. The transmission includes basic information about their civilization. They call themselves the Galactic Council and claim to represent dozens of species across this part of the galaxy. They've had peace for 1,000 years, but something called the Korath Empire has started attacking them again. The Admiral walked over to examine the star charts that had been included with the message. The scale was staggering. The conflict zone covered hundreds of light years and included solar systems with billions of inhabitants. 3 entire civilizations had already fallen, and the enemy was advancing toward more populated areas. Sir, there's something else, Davis continued. The message talks about their military failures. These Korath things seem to adapt to whatever weapons are used against them. Energy weapons stop working after a few shots. Kinetic weapons become useless as their ships change to resist them. They're describing an enemy that learns and evolves during battle. Morrison nodded slowly. This matched theoretical scenarios that Earth's military planners had developed for fighting unknown alien threats. The possibility of facing adaptive technology had been one of the reasons. Human weapon systems were designed for maximum flexibility and rapid modification. Get me a secure line to the Joint Chiefs, Morrison ordered. This is too big for a field decision. Within 2 hours, the most senior military leaders on Earth were connected via quantum encrypted communication. General Patricia Wells of the Army, Admiral Richard Hayes of the Navy, General Carlos Rodriguez of the Air Force, and Admiral Morrison himself gathered virtually to discuss humanity's first potential interstellar conflict. The way I see it, General Wells began, we have 3 options. We can ignore the message and hope these Korath things don't find Earth. We can send a token force to show good faith, but avoid real commitment. Or we can treat this as a serious threat to human security and respond accordingly. Admiral Hayes pulled up Earth's current fleet status. We've got 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and 2 experimental dreadnoughts. That's not much compared to the numbers these aliens are talking about. They mention fleets with hundreds of ships. But look at what happened to their fleets, General Rodriguez pointed out. Numbers don't seem to matter if the enemy can just adapt to your weapons and tactics. Maybe what they need isn't more ships, but different ships. Morrison had been thinking the same thing. Earth's military philosophy had been shaped by thousands of years of warfare on a hostile planet. Human tactics assumed that any enemy would adapt and evolve. Human weapons were designed to be modified quickly during combat. Human soldiers trained to fight in environments that changed constantly. There's another factor to consider, Morrison said. If these Korath things are as dangerous as the message suggests, they'll eventually find Earth anyway. Better to fight them now with allies than later by ourselves? The discussion continued for another hour, but the conclusion was inevitable. Earth would respond to the Galactic Council's request, but on human terms. They would send enough force to make a real difference, commanded by officers who understood adaptive warfare. Admiral Morrison selected Captain Lisa Rodriguez to lead the expeditionary force. The 42-year-old officer had distinguished herself in fleet exercises and theoretical wargaming. More importantly, she had helped develop many of the tactical doctrines that made human ships so different from standard military designs. Captain Rodriguez would command from the heavy cruiser Edzi Defiant, accompanied by Captains Ryan Hayes and Nicole Thompson in command of destroyer squadrons. The force would include 6 heavy cruisers, 18 destroyers, and one of the experimental dreadnoughts, the EDS Titan under Captain Steve Bradley. The fleet that assembled at Luna Base over the following week represented the cutting edge of human military technology. The ships were heavily armored, designed to survive in the hostile environment of space combat. Their weapon systems could be reconfigured during battle, switching between kinetic projectiles, energy weapons, nuclear warheads, and experimental plasma cannons. Most importantly, every ship carried advanced tactical computers loaded with adaptive combat protocols. The software was designed to analyze enemy behavior in real time and suggest counter-tactics. It was the digital equivalent of human military thinking. Assume your enemy will adapt, And be ready to change faster than they can dock, Captain. Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Defiant as her fleet prepared to depart. The destination coordinates provided by the Galactic Council would take them to a system called Kepler 442, where Valorian forces were reportedly under siege by Korath bioships. "All ships report ready for departure," announced her tactical officer, Commander Ben Parker. "Estimated travel time to the target system is 14 days at maximum jump speed." Rodriguez nodded and settled into her command chair. She had read and reread the intelligence reports about the Korath threat, biomechanical ships that adapted to enemy tactics, weapons that became useless after brief exposure, conventional military doctrine failing completely against an enemy that learned faster than traditional forces could adjust. It sounded like exactly the kind of challenge that human military thinking had been designed to handle. Earth's greatest advantage had always been its adaptability, its willingness to change tactics and try new approaches when old ones failed. If these aliens had been fighting the same way for 1,000 years, they were about to get a very unpleasant education in human military philosophy. "Take us out," Rodriguez ordered. "Time to show the galaxy what happens when you ask a Deathworld for help." The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them weapons and tactics that had never been seen in galactic warfare. Behind them, Earth continued its preparations for the possibility that this first deployment might not be enough. If the Korath Empire was truly as dangerous as described, humanity would need to be ready for a much larger conflict. None of them realized that they were about to introduce the galaxy to concepts it had never encountered: total war, adaptive tactics, and the kind of ruthless creativity that could only come from a species that had learned to fight on a world where everything was trying to kill them. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system and immediately encountered a scene of chaos. Massive biomechanical ships that looked like diseased whales covered in metal plates were systematically harvesting everything in the system. Asteroid mining stations burned while evacuation ships fled in panic, many of them leaking atmosphere from weapon impacts. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the EDS Defiant, studying the tactical display with growing concern. The Korath bioships were enormous, each one easily 3 times the size of her heavy cruiser. Their hulls seemed to pulse with organic life, covered in what looked like metallic tumors that glowed with energy. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Valorian Defense Coordinator," reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. "They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance and asking us to maintain a safe distance from the Korath vessels." Rodriguez nodded toward the communication station. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to show Commander Nethros, a blue-skinned Valorian with 4 arms and large black eyes. The alien looked exhausted and desperate. "Human vessels, we appreciate your response to our call for aid, but you must withdraw immediately. Your ships cannot survive engagement with the Korath biovessels. They will adapt to your weapons within minutes." "Commander, I'm Captain Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Ship Defiant. We'd like a full tactical briefing before making any decisions about engagement." Rodriguez replied calmly. "Neth single quotes." Ross made a gesture that the translation software interpreted as surprise. "Captain, with respect, your vessels are too small and your technology too primitive. The Korath have defeated fleets 10 times your size using weapons far more advanced than yours. Please evacuate the remaining civilians while we attempt to delay them." Rodriguez exchanged glances with her tactical officer, Commander Ben Parker. She could see the same thought in his eyes that was running through her mind. These aliens had been fighting defensively for so long they had forgotten that warfare could be anything else. "Commander Nethros will assist with evacuation operations, but we also need detailed information about Korath tactical patterns. Can you transmit your combat data?" The Valorian commander looked confused but complied. Over the next hour, Rodriguez and her senior staff studied the battle records from previous engagements. The pattern was always the same. Galactic Council forces would engage the Korath bioships with standard energy weapons and kinetic bombardment. The bioships would absorb the initial attacks, analyze the weapon signatures, and adapt their defenses accordingly. Within minutes, the same weapons would become completely ineffective. Chief Engineer Lieutenant Kate Sullivan pointed out the critical flaw in the galactic approach. "Captain, they're using the same tactics every time. Same weapon types, same formation patterns, same targeting priorities. No wonder the Korath can adapt so quickly." Rodriguez studied the enemy formation through her ship's sensors. The bioships moved in coordinated groups, their hulls constantly shifting and changing as they processed new information. She could see weapon ports opening and closing, armor plates rearranging themselves, and what looked like sensor arrays growing and retracting as needed. "They're optimizing for standard galactic warfare," Parker observed. "Energy weapons, formation flying, predictable targeting patterns. But look at their adaptation cycles. They seem to lock in defensive configurations based on the first few minutes of engagement." Rodriguez made her decision. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual. Prepare for combat engagement. Initialize Protocol Darwin." Protocol Darwin was Earth's adaptive warfare doctrine. Instead of using fixed tactics, human ships would continuously modify their approach throughout the battle. Weapons would cycle through different types and frequencies. Formation patterns would shift constantly. Targeting priorities would change based on real-time analysis of enemy responses. "Captain, the Valorians are requesting we maintain safe distance," Mitchell reported. "Tell them we're going to demonstrate human tactical doctrine," Rodriguez replied. "All ships advance to engagement range. Target the lead bioship and initiate rotating weapon sequence." The human fleet accelerated toward the Korath formation. The bioships immediately detected the approaching vessels and began moving to intercept. Rodriguez watched as their hulls started shifting. Preparing for another standard engagement against predictable galactic tactics, the humans opened fire. At maximum range, the EDS Defiant launched a salvo of kinetic slugs while her escorts fired nuclear-tipped missiles. The Korath bioship absorbed the impacts, its hull plates rearranging to deflect. Kinetic weapons and energy fields forming to contain explosive damage. Then the humans did something the Korath had never encountered. Instead of continuing with the same weapons, they immediately switched tactics. Kinetic slugs became explosive penetrator rounds. Nuclear missiles switched to plasma warheads that burned at different temperatures. Energy weapons began cycling through frequencies that changed every few seconds. The bioship's adaptation systems struggled to keep up. Each time they optimized for one weapon type, the humans switched to something else. Defensive configurations designed for kinetic weapons failed against energy attacks. Shields tuned for nuclear explosions couldn't handle plasma burns. The constant changes prevented the bioship from locking in any stable defensive pattern. Captain Nicole Thompson's destroyer squadron introduced another element the Korath had never seen. Instead of maintaining formation, her ships began operating independently, each one using different weapons and tactics. Some ships focused on rapid-fire kinetic weapons, while others used sustained energy beams. A few specialized in electronic warfare. Jamming the bioship's communication systems, the lead Korath vessel began showing damage for the first time in the engagement. Sections of its hull cracked under the constant bombardment of changing weapons. Its defensive systems overloaded as they tried to adapt to dozens of different threats simultaneously. But the real shock came when Captain Ryan Hayes led his destroyer squadron in a close-range assault. Human ships were designed for the harsh environment of space combat with heavy armor and redundant systems. They could survive impacts that would destroy the elegant vessels preferred by galactic civilizations. Hayes' ships closed to point-blank range and began targeting specific sections of the bioship's hull. When energy weapons proved ineffective, they switched to kinetic penetrators. When the bioship adapted to those, they used nuclear warheads at close range, accepting damage to their own ships in exchange for guaranteed hits on the enemy. The Korath bioship, faced with an enemy that refused to fight predictably, began making desperate adaptations. Its hull configuration changed every few minutes. trying to find some defensive pattern that could handle the chaotic human assault. But each change only gave the humans new weaknesses to exploit. Commander Nethros watched from his command ship in amazement as the supposedly primitive human vessels systematically destroyed a bioship that had been considered invincible. "How are they doing this?" he transmitted to Rodriguez. "We learned warfare on a world that kept trying to kill us." Rodriguez replied as her ship launched another salvo of adaptive munitions. "We assume every enemy will evolve, so we built our entire doctrine around changing faster than they can adapt." The first Korath bioship exploded in a brilliant flash of organic and mechanical debris. For the first time in their recorded history, the Korath Empire had lost a vessel to inferior technology operated by a supposedly primitive species. The remaining bioships began retreating, their adaptation systems overwhelmed by an enemy that refused to be predictable. News of the human victory at Kepler 442 spread through Galactic Council space faster than any ship could travel. For the first time in over 2 years, a Korath bioship had been destroyed in combat. The impossible had happened, and suddenly every species in the galaxy wanted to know more about these humans from the deadly world called Earth. Admiral Jake Morrison arrived at the Forward Command Base on Valorian Prime 3 weeks after the first engagement. He brought with him reinforcements that doubled the human presence in Council space: 12 more heavy cruisers, 24 destroyers, and the massive experimental dreadnought Ed.Z. Seaton under Captain Steve Bradley. But more importantly, he brought something the galaxy had never seen before: a complete military doctrine based on the assumption that peace was temporary and war was the natural state of existence. Captain Rodriguez met Morrison at the orbital station above Valorian Prime, the blue-skimmed. Valorians had constructed the facility as a temporary command center, but it was clear they had never designed anything for actual military operations. The corridors were too wide, the rooms too open, and there were far too many windows that would be vulnerable in combat. "Captain, I've read your after-action reports," Morrison said as they walked through the station. "Destroying that bioship was impressive, but the real question is whether we can scale up these tactics for a larger campaign." Rodriguez nodded toward the tactical center where human and Valorian officers were working together to analyze enemy movements. "Sir, the Korath are already adapting to our presence. They've started deploying smaller, faster bioships that try to avoid prolonged engagements, but they're also showing signs of confusion. Their whole system is based on learning from predictable enemies." Morrison studied the holographic display that showed Korath positions throughout the sector. The bioships were no longer advancing in the steady, methodical pattern that had characterized their previous campaigns. Instead, they seemed to be consolidating their forces and developing new strategies. Commander Nethros approached the human officers with obvious excitement. "Admiral Morrison, we have received requests for assistance from 17 different council species. Everyone wants human tactical advisors to help train their forces in your adaptive warfare methods." The Admiral considered this carefully. Earth's expeditionary force was small compared to the vast fleets available to the Galactic Council, but human tactics were proving effective in ways that simple numbers could not match. If they could teach other species to fight like humans, the combined force might be able to push back against the Korath Empire. "We'll need to be selective," Morrison decided. "Send teams to species that have ships capable of rapid modification. Focus on teaching adaptive thinking rather than specific tactics." Over the following weeks, human officers spread throughout Council space. Lieutenant Commander Paul Anderson worked with Zephyrian crystal ships, teaching their crews how to reconfigure energy patterns mid-battle. Captain Elena Martinez trained Centauri pilots in close-range assault techniques that their elegant vessels had never been designed for. Commander Jack Wilson established the first cross-species marine units. Combining human boarding tactics with alien specialized capabilities, the results were immediate and dramatic. Council forces that had been retreating for months suddenly began winning engagements against Korath scouting groups. The bioships, accustomed to facing predictable opposition, found themselves overwhelmed by enemies that changed tactics constantly, but the Korath Empire was not standing still. Admiral Morrison received disturbing reports from deep space reconnaissance missions. The bioships were undergoing rapid evolution, developing new variants that seemed designed specifically to counter human tactics. Some ships had developed multiple hull configurations that could shift rapidly between different defensive patterns. Others had grown swarms of smaller organisms that attacked in chaotic, unpredictable patterns that mimicked human tactical flexibility. The turning point came when long-range sensors detected a massive Korath fleet moving toward the Council's core systems. The formation included over 300 bioships, many of them new variants that had never been seen before. Most disturbing were the reports of ships that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, making them almost impossible to target with conventional weapons. Morrison called a war council that brought together the senior commanders from every species involved in the defense effort. The meeting took place aboard the EDS Titan, partly because the massive dreadnought had the most secure communications systems, but also because Morrison wanted the alien officers to see what human military engineering could accomplish when resources were unlimited. The Korath are learning, Morrison began, addressing the mixed group of humans and aliens gathered in the ship's briefing room. They're developing countermeasures for our adaptive tactics. If we're going to stop this fleet, we need to think beyond conventional warfare. Captain Rodriguez activated a holographic display showing the approaching enemy formation. Sir, our analysis suggests they're not just trying to counter our tactics. They're trying to overwhelm our decision-making capabilities. If they can force U.S. to adapt faster than we can process information, our advantage disappears. Zephyrian Fleet Commander Quental spoke with crystalline tones that rang through the translation system. The humans have taught us much about flexibility in combat. But perhaps it is time for us to teach the humans something about galactic warfare. Our species have capabilities that Earth has never encountered. Morrison listened as the alien commanders described technologies and abilities that human military doctrine had never considered. The Valorians could link their minds temporarily, allowing perfect coordination between ships. The Zephyrians could process tactical information at speeds that made human computers seem slow. The Centauri had developed energy manipulation techniques that could turn enemy weapons against themselves. We've been thinking about this wrong, Morrison realized. We've been trying to teach you to fight like humans. But what if we combined human adaptability with your specialized capabilities? What if we created something completely new? The idea that emerged from the planning session was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of separate species fighting alongside each other, they would create truly integrated battle groups. Human ships would provide tactical flexibility and adaptive capability. Valorian vessels would coordinate fleet movements through mental links. Zephyrian crystal ships would process battlefield information faster than any individual species could manage. Centauri energy specialists would provide offensive capabilities that could overcome any defensive adaptation. Captain Rodriguez was chosen to lead the first integrated battle group. Her command would include ships from 6 different species, all operating under tactical doctrines that combine the best elements of each civilization's military capabilities. The formation they developed looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human heavy cruisers at the center providing adaptive firepower, surrounded by Valorian coordination vessels with Zephyrian information ships providing tactical analysis, and Centauri energy platforms delivering devastating long-range attacks. When the Korath fleet reached the outer defense perimeter, they encountered something their adaptation systems had never been designed to handle. The defending force didn't just change tactics during battle, it changed the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Ships that should have been vulnerable to certain attacks were protected by energy fields generated by completely different vessels. Tactical decisions were made at speeds that exceeded biological or mechanical processing capabilities. Weapons that the bioships had never encountered suddenly appeared as human ships, were modified in real time by alien engineering techniques. The first engagement lasted 14 hours and ended with the complete retreat of the Korath advance force. For the first time in their history, the bioships had encountered an enemy that could evolve faster than they could adapt. The galaxy's peaceful species had finally learned what humans had always known. When survival is at stake, cooperation and adaptation are the only paths to victory. But as the celebrating began on Valorian Prime, long-range sensors detected something that made even Admiral Morrison pause. Deep in Korath space, massive energy signatures suggested that the Empire was preparing something far beyond anything they had used before. The real war was just beginning. The revelation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helen Roberts, Earth's leading xenobiologist, was studying captured Korath biomaterial when she made a discovery that changed everything. The tissue samples showed signs of extreme stress at the cellular level, as if the organisms were being pushed far beyond their natural limits. More disturbing were the genetic markers that suggested the Korath were not originally an aggressive species. Admiral Morrison, you need to see this, Doctor. Roberts called from her laboratory aboard the EDS Titan. The Korath bioships aren't just weapons, they're refugees. Morrison and Captain Rodriguez joined the scientist in examining her findings. The biomaterial under the microscope showed clear signs of forced evolution, genetic modifications that had been implemented rapidly and without regard for the organism's long-term survival. It was the biological equivalent of jury-rigging equipment for emergency use. These organisms are dying, Dr. Roberts explained. The adaptations that make them so effective in combat are also killing them. They're burning through their genetic stability at an unsustainable rate. This isn't conquest, it's desperation. The implications hit Morrison immediately. They're not expanding because they want to, they're expanding because they have to. Something is forcing them to evolve this rapidly. Rodriguez pulled up long-range sensor data from the edge of Korath space. Sir, remember those massive energy signatures we detected? What if they're not preparing new weapons? What if they're running from something? The answer came 3 days later when the deepest space monitoring stations detected something impossible. Ships were emerging from the void between galaxies, vessels that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved in perfect formations that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed partially outside normal space. Captain Chris Evans, commanding the reconnaissance destroyer ES Pathfinder, transmitted the first close-range observations of the new threat. Admiral, these things aren't like anything we've ever seen. They're not just dark, they're absorbing everything around them. Energy, matter, even information seems to disappear when it gets close to them. The entities called themselves the Devourers in the brief communication they sent to both human and Korath forces. Their message was simple and terrifying. They consumed civilizations not just physically, but completely. When they finished with a species, even the memory of that species' existence would be erased from the universe. Morrison found himself in the unprecedented position of negotiating with Korath Overmind Zixthara, the collective consciousness that controlled the bioship fleets. The meeting took place in neutral space, with human and Korath vessels maintaining careful distance from each other. The Overmind appeared as a writhing mass of organic material that pulsed with its own light. When it spoke, the words came directly into the minds of everyone present, bypassing translation systems entirely. Humans of Earth, we have observed your warfare methods. You understand adaptation as we do. Perhaps together we can survive what? Commies. You've been running from these devourers, Rodriguez stated. That's why you've been consuming other civilizations. You're trying to evolve fast enough to survive them. Correct. Our species encountered them at the edge of our original territory. They do not simply destroy, they unmake. Civilizations touched by them cease to have ever existed. We absorbed other species hoping to gain the strength to resist them. It was not enough. Morrison studied the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Unlike the organic chaos of Korath bioships or the elegant designs of council vessels, these entities moved with mathematical precision that suggested they operated according to laws of physics that normal matter couldn't follow. What do you Know about their capabilities? Morrison asked. They consume information itself. Traditional weapons become useless not because they adapt, but because the knowledge of how to use those weapons is erased. They attack the concept of resistance, making it impossible to fight back. Dr. Roberts, monitoring the conversation from the Titan, suddenly understood the true scope of the threat. Admiral, they're not just weapons, they're entropy given form. They represent the end of everything: matter, energy, information, even the possibility of existence. The combined human council and Korath fleets that assembled at the galaxy's edge represented something unprecedented in universal history. Over 2,000 ships from dozens of species, united by the simple need to continue existing. Admiral Rodriguez, promoted to Supreme Commander of the combined forces, stood on the bridge of the modified EDS, defiant as the enemy approached. The battle that followed challenged every understanding of warfare and physics. The Devourer entities didn't simply attack ships, they attacked the concept of resistance itself. Weapons would fire normally for a few moments, then suddenly the crews would forget how to operate them. Tactical plans would disappear from computer memories as they were being executed. Ships would lose cohesion as the knowledge of how to maintain formation simply vanished, but humanity brought something to the battle that the Devourers had never encountered: the refusal to accept defeat. On Earth, extinction had always been just one disaster away. Humans had survived ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and countless other catastrophes through sheer stubborn determination to keep existing. Captain Elena Martinez, commanding a mixed squadron of human and Valorian ships, discovered the key to fighting the Devourers when her tactical computer was wiped clean during combat. Instead of retreating, she ordered her ships to fight using pure instinct and improvisation. Without complex plans to erase or sophisticated weapons to disable, her forces proved surprisingly effective. All ships, this is Rodriguez, the Supreme Commander broadcast to the entire fleet. Abandon your tactical computers. Forget everything you know about proper warfare. Fight like your ancestors did when they had nothing but rocks and fire. The tide turned when the combined forces stopped trying to fight intelligently and started fighting desperately. Korath bioships rammed Devourer entities at full speed, sacrificing themselves to damage enemies that couldn't be hurt by conventional weapons. Council vessels linked together in formations that made no tactical sense, but somehow worked through pure coordination. Human ships charged into impossible odds, their crews operating on instinct and determination alone. The final moment came. When Captain Rodriguez, her ship badly damaged and most of her crew unconscious, faced the lead Devourer entity alone. The creature tried to erase her knowledge of resistance, to make her forget why she was fighting. But Rodriguez was human, evolved on a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill her species. "You can take away my weapons," she said as her ship's emergency power systems failed. "You can erase my tactical knowledge. You can make me forget how to fight properly. But you can't make me forget that life finds a way." She rammed the Defiant directly into the Devourer's core, and in that moment of contact, something impossible happened. The entity that consumed information itself was forced to process a concept it couldn't understand: hope. The idea that existence was worth preserving regardless of odds, that life would continue despite every logical reason to give up. The Devourer fleet retreated, their mathematical certainty shattered by an emotional concept they couldn't process or consume. The galaxy was saved not by superior technology or brilliant tactics, but by the simple human belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Dr. Math. As the combined fleets limped back to Council space, Admiral Rodriguez established the Terran doctrine throughout galactic civilization. The peaceful species that had known only comfort for 1,000 years began learning that survival sometimes required struggle. The galaxy that had stagnated in safety started growing and evolving again. Years later, when new threats emerged from unknown regions of space, the response was swift and unified. The message that went out to all civilizations was simple: when the universe tries to kill you, the only proper response is to try harder to live.